What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. URGOT's a champion who's kind of been in a rough spot for quite a long while, until more recently when he received a buff that was intended to be kind of like a band-aid fix for him, but it's actually put him in a decent spot for the first time in quite a while. As well, it seems like the rework that may have been in development for URGOT is experiencing massive delays and definitely should have been released by now, if not quite a while back. And so it leads me to ask, does URGOT need a rework? Also, just a heads up, when this video goes live, I'll be giving away a $2,000 PC with some friends, as well as a keyboard, a headset, and a DX Racer chair, and it's super easy to enter. Just check the link in the description. And if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, hit that dislike. And let's get started. So with any given champion, when it comes to asking whether or not they need a rework, the things to consider really come down to how bad the problems are with their design and how much room for improvement is there actually available if a potential rework would take place. So first off, we need to take a look at his gameplay, which actually does suffer from a few design problems. The first major problem his gameplay has is the way his kit as a whole works and revolves around Noxian Corrosive Charge, his E, so that he's left in a spot that creates a very binary playstyle. Either he hits the E and does a bunch of high targeted damage, or he just doesn't and kind of waits for it to come back off cooldown. And that type of design isn't entirely ideal, and it can work, but with URGOT, it's not really executed effectively, and it does typically make, especially in URGOT's case, the champion lack counterplay, because the reward for actually landing the key ability, in this case URGOT's E, is ridiculously high for how difficult of a skill shot it is to land. The thing is, when URGOT lands his E, you don't ever really end up fighting him, you always just run away and try to take as little damage as possible, which is an entirely interactive design. Another champion who has a kind of binary style, but is an example of a binary style that I would say is done right and is probably in a healthy way, is someone like Morgana actually. But with Morgana's case, Dark Binding is a really slow and easy to dodge projectile compared to URGOT's Corrosive Charge. So in a lot of gameplay scenarios, especially when playing a short ranged champion versus URGOT in lane, he does feel very frustrating to face and can lack counterplay in some situations and outplay options in general, which was the main cause of him getting nerfed into unplayability for about 2 years ago, until he finally got some love recently. As well, his passive adds into that quite a lot, and it lacks interaction for an effect that actually has a massive influence on a fight. His passive is the kind of case of just some poorly communicated or even hidden power in a sense. In a fight, especially in a 1v1, it's a massive game changer. But it's really hard to appreciate that or even take note of the fact that it exists in the heat of the moment, since the ability is poorly communicated when you're playing against it. It just needs like a bigger animation, a more significant particle effect kind of thing. And on top of that, I can't say for sure, but I guess it is actually arguable that such a strong effect maybe doesn't make sense on such a simple ability, and maybe it should actually be given a bit more complexity to give opponents the option to interact with it. Maybe like a 3-hit passive, or some kind of delay, or just something that makes it a lot harder to actually land on a target. And on top of all that, we have URGOT's ultimate, which is a really cool ability, don't get me wrong, but it does kind of feel out of place within his actual gameplay kit. It's hard to say for sure because his ultimate is not a bad spell by any means on its own, and it definitely does have a place in League of Legends. It's an awesome spell, it's just that the design of the ultimate doesn't entirely make sense on a champion with a kit that has a ranged focus. The ultimate makes a lot more sense to put on like a melee champion, a bruiser or something. It's very anti-synergistic in a lot of situations with URGOT, and as a result isn't actually as good as it could be, as it should be really, while making him almost impossible to play as a hyper carry. You have to kind of play him as a tanky brawler, which isn't entirely ideal in a lot of situations. You'd think that a targeted swap effect would be enough to totally carry his kit in a lot of games, but it's really not, just because it doesn't work that well with the rest of his kit, and it can be conflicting, sometimes even punishing to use, or just downright clunky, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it gone from his kit if an URGOT rework does take place. And when it comes to room for improvement, URGOT definitely does have quite a decent amount. I mentioned earlier the passive thing in that it really just needs a lot more particle effects because it's such a poorly communicated ability, but also, when it comes to his theme, his gameplay is lacking quite a bit of personality. But the concept of being this reanimated Frankenstein monster almost, with weapons for hands, is pretty damn cool, and that thematic design could be taken advantage of a lot more. URGOT is the type of champion that would really gain a lot from a visual update, a lore revamp, and some changes in his kit to make it fit with his personality a lot more, similar to how Sion was reworked. But one thing that might be a bit weird to understand is that URGOT has been a victim of what I would describe as poor marketing more than anything else. URGOT as a champion for the longest time has had so much potential in solo lanes as a great counterpick to a lot of champions, but for some reason everyone keeps playing him as an AD carry in the bot lane, which hasn't really made sense for a long time actually. And although it's getting a lot better recently, a lot of his past history of being a super weak champion can, at least a little bit, be contributed to him being much more popular in a suboptimal role as an AD carry. And the thing is that even when he is good, like right now, nobody plays him, and a rework and an upgrade would bring the spark of life that he needs to be brought into the spotlight a lot more, because right now he's not really seen as a cool option by most of the community, despite the fact that he is actually a strong champion right now. But I mean, every champion does have their own individual problems, and it's not always something that translates into needing a rework, but with URGOT there's just so many reasons to want to rework him, and not really that many to try and avoid it, since the thing is that most reworks, you always run the risk of upsetting the community of people who already know and love and play that champion a lot, but with URGOT, it's kind of sad to say, but that little niche community, well, with URGOT, it doesn't really exist, honestly, as he's been the least popular and least played champion for years and years now. So with all the reasons piled against him, it's hard to see that he doesn't at least deserve a visual update. Now, Riot Meddler started talks about an URGOT rework about 2 years ago, and it's gone through quite a lot of development time. I mentioned one of the scrapped abilities from a version of an URGOT rework in one of my previous videos, of him having like this J-skate kind of thing that would multiply projectiles that were shot through it. But I guess URGOT's a champion where a good rework for him is, more than I think about it, it's actually pretty dang hard to get right. It's been pushed back again and again and again, and the short-term fix of giving him some buffs is potentially proving to be relatively effective. But despite his recent success, URGOT is probably the biggest victim of Riot's neglect, especially when you consider his past history, despite the fact that he's in a decent spot right now. So yes, I see URGOT as a champion who could benefit a ton, and overall just straight up needs a rework. And I'm finding it hard to create an argument for otherwise. It's honestly quite long overdue. I mean, he's literally the least popular champion in the game still, and has been for years, and as a result should probably be the guy most deserving of getting some love. So that's how I see it, that's my opinion, but what do you think? Does URGOT need a rework, or maybe are the buffs just enough for what he needs? Leave a comment, subscribe if you want, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.